At 0430 on the morning of August 1st, 1944, Generalfeldmarschall Erwin Rommel lay unconscious in a hospital bed in Bernay, France, with severe head trauma from an Allied strafing attack 3 days earlier. 50 kilometers to the west, near the town of Avranches, Lieutenant General George Smith Patton Jr. stood in a command post watching Third Army units pour through a gap in German lines that shouldn't have existed. 8 American divisions moving through a corridor less than 3 kilometers wide, 30,000 vehicles, 150,000 men, all flowing west, then turning southeast toward the Loire River, toward Paris, toward Germany itself. The German 7th Army under Generaloberst Paul Hausser was collapsing. The defensive line that had held Normandy for 2 months was disintegrating in 72 hours. And Rommel, the one German commander who had predicted exactly this disaster, who had warned repeatedly that the Americans under Patton would break through and couldn't be stopped once mobile, wasn't there to see it happen. He'd been right. His superiors hadn't listened. And now the Western Front was about to unravel in a way no one in Berlin thought possible. What the German High Command didn't understand, what most of them refused to believe even as it happened, was that American forces weren't the industrial militia they'd been dismissing for 3 years. Under the right commander, with the right operational freedom, American mechanized forces could move faster, hit harder, and sustain operations longer than any army in the world. Rommel knew this. He'd studied Patton in North Africa. He'd read intelligence reports about Patton's training methods in England. He understood what was coming, and in the next 2 weeks, Patton's Third Army would advance over 600 miles, destroy or scatter 15 German divisions, liberate most of France west of Paris, and demonstrate a level of operational mobility that would force every German officer who survived to completely reassess everything they thought they knew about American military capability. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The German perception of American military capability in 1944 was rooted in direct combat experience and cultural prejudice. German officers had fought Americans in North Africa in 1942 and 1943. They'd watched American units at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia in February 1943 get routed by German armor in a battle that became infamous as an American defeat. The German II Panzer Division under General Major Hans-Jürgen von Arnim had smashed through inexperienced American positions, destroyed over 100 American tanks, captured thousands of prisoners, and demonstrated what German professionals considered the inevitable result when amateurs met veterans. The German assessment from Kasserine was simple. American soldiers were brave enough individually, but poorly led, inadequately trained in combined arms operations, and completely outmatched tactically by German forces. American equipment was adequate but uninspired. The M4 Sherman tank was mechanically reliable but undergunned and under-armored compared to German panzers. American artillery was numerous but unimaginative in employment. American infantry fought with the enthusiasm of civilians in uniform, not the discipline of professional soldiers. This assessment wasn't entirely unfair in early 1943. The American II Corps at Kasserine was new to combat, led by officers who'd never commanded in battle, employing doctrine that hadn't been tested under fire. They made mistakes. They learned. But the German perception froze at that moment of American weakness and never updated despite contrary evidence. By mid-1944, the American military that landed at Normandy bore almost no resemblance to the force that stumbled at Kasserine. 15 months of continuous combat in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy had created a generation of experienced American officers and non-commissioned officers who understood mechanized warfare as well as anyone in the world. American doctrine had evolved through hard lessons. American equipment had improved. American logistics, always the hidden strength, had been refined to the point where American forces could sustain operations that would have exhausted any other army. Erwin Rommel didn't share these assumptions. Rommel had commanded German forces in North Africa from February 1941 to March 1943. He'd fought British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian, and American forces. He understood their capabilities and their limitations better than any German officer alive, and he'd paid particular attention to American forces under one specific commander, George Patton. Rommel first encountered Patton's forces at El Guitar in Tunisia in March 1943. The American II Corps, now under Patton's command after Kasserine, had positioned itself to block German attacks toward the Allied rear. Rommel sent the 10th Panzer Division against American positions on March 23, 1943, expecting the kind of breakthrough that had worked at Kasserine. Instead, the German attack ran into prepared American defenses, with anti-tank guns positioned in depth, artillery pre-registered on likely approach routes, and infantry that held its ground under German fire. The 10th Panzer lost 32 tanks in 4 hours and achieved nothing. The attack failed completely. Rommel withdrew and tried a different approach the next day. Same result. American defenses held, German casualties mounted. After 3 days, Rommel called off the attacks. In his personal notes, he wrote that the Americans at El Guitar fought with a level of tactical sophistication he hadn't seen from them before. Their defensive positions were well chosen. Their artillery fire was devastating and well coordinated. Their infantry held under pressure. Something had changed. What had changed was command. Patton had taken over 3rd Corps on March 6, 1943, with explicit orders to restore American fighting reputation after Kasserine. He'd spent 2 weeks reorganizing, retraining, and more importantly, reshaping how American officers thought about combat. Patton's philosophy was simple: attack aggressively, move fast, never let the enemy recover, use mobility as a weapon, accept risk in exchange for speed. These principles, applied consistently, transformed how American units fought. Rommel recognized immediately that Patton was different from other American commanders, not more careful like Omar Bradley, not more methodical like Courtney Hodges. Patton was aggressive, unpredictable, willing to take operational risks that other American commanders avoided. In German military culture, these were qualities of a dangerous opponent. Rommel respected dangerous opponents. He'd built his reputation fighting them. After North Africa, Rommel returned to Europe and eventually was given command of Army Group B, defending northern France against the expected Allied invasion. By early 1944, he was responsible for coastal defences from the Netherlands to the Loire River. He knew the Allies were coming. He knew they'd land somewhere on the French coast. He didn't know exactly where or when, but he knew who would command the Allied ground forces once they broke out of the beachhead. Intelligence reports consistently indicated that Patton commanded 1st United States Army Group, the main invasion force positioned in southeastern England opposite the Pas de Calais. This was deliberate Allied deception. Operation Fortitude, the cover plan for D-Day, used Patton's reputation to convince the Germans that the main invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. The deception worked perfectly because German intelligence believed Patton was the Allies' best operational commander. Wherever Patton was, that's where the main attack would come. The Germans positioned their strongest forces near Calais, waiting for Patton. The actual invasion came at Normandy on June 6, 1944, under a different command structure entirely. Even after D-Day, German High Command believed the Normandy landings were a diversion, that the real invasion at Calais under Patton would come soon. They held back armoured reserves that could have been used to crush the Normandy beachhead because they were convinced Patton's army group was still waiting to attack. This belief persisted for weeks. Rommel, commanding the forces actually fighting in Normandy, understood faster than his superiors that Normandy was the real invasion and that Patton would eventually appear there, not at Calais. Rommel's assessment of the strategic situation in France by mid-July 1944 was bleak. The Allies had landed over 1 million men in Normandy. They controlled the air completely. German reinforcements had to move at night to avoid Allied fighter bombers. German supply lines were constantly disrupted by air attacks. The hedgerow terrain of Normandy favoured defence, but every day the Allies brought more forces ashore, while German strength declined through attrition. Eventually, the Allies would break through, and when they did, nothing could stop them from reaching Germany, because the Germans lacked the mobile reserves to contain a breakthrough. Rommel explained this situation repeatedly to his superiors in reports and personal meetings. He recommended withdrawing German forces to more defensible positions further inland, preserving strength, trading space for time. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, agreed with Rommel's assessment. Hitler refused to consider any withdrawal. German forces would hold every metre of French soil. They would defend the coast. They would counterattack any Allied penetration and throw the invaders back into the sea. This strategic rigidity meant German forces in Normandy were locked into positions where Allied firepower could destroy them systematically. By late July, the German 7th Army defending the western sector of Normandy had been ground down to minimal combat effectiveness. Most infantry divisions were at 50% strength or less. Panzer divisions had lost most of their tanks. Artillery batteries were running out of ammunition. The defensive line was held together by the determination of German soldiers and the tactical skill of experienced officers, but both were being consumed by attrition. On July 17, 1944, Rommel was returning from an inspection of front-line positions when his staff car was attacked by British Spitfires near Saint-Foy-de-Montgomery. The aircraft made 3 strafing passes. 20mm cannon rounds hit the vehicle. Rommel's driver was killed. The car crashed. Rommel suffered severe head trauma, a fractured skull, and was evacuated unconscious to a hospital. He survived but was out of action. Command of Army Group B passed to Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge. 3 days later, on July 20th, a group of German officers attempted to assassinate Hitler with a bomb planted in a conference room at Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. The bomb exploded but failed to kill Hitler. The conspiracy was discovered. Hundreds of German officers were arrested, interrogated, executed. The purge of suspected conspirators would continue for months. Rommel, recovering from his injuries, would eventually be implicated through his contacts with some of the conspirators, though his actual involvement remains unclear. In October 1944, he would be forced to commit suicide to protect his family from arrest. July 20th, 1944. Rommel was simply unconscious in a hospital, unaware that the officer corps he'd served for 30 years was about to tear itself apart, and unaware that 300 kilometers to the west, American forces were preparing Operation Cobra. The breakout attack that would do exactly what Rommel had warned was inevitable. Operation Cobra was conceived by General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st United States Army. The plan was to concentrate overwhelming air and artillery firepower on a narrow sector of the German line west of Saint-Lô, create a gap, then push mechanized forces through before the Germans could react. The attack would come on the western side of the Normandy front, where German defences were weakest. Once through, American armour would turn west toward Brittany and south toward the Loire River, unhinging the entire German defensive position. The execution date was set for July 24th, 1944. The preliminary bombardment would involve over 1,500 heavy bombers from the United States 8th Air Force, plus medium bombers and fighter bombers, delivering over 4,000 tons of high explosive and fragmentation bombs on a rectangular target area 7 kilometers wide and 2.5 kilometers deep. After the bombing, American ground forces would attack with 3 infantry divisions and 2 armored divisions, overwhelming the survivors and punching through to open country beyond. The bombing on July 24th was aborted due to weather. Some aircraft had already released their bombs before the recall order was received. Bombs fell on American positions, causing casualties, but the main attack was postponed. On July 25th, the attack was rescheduled. The weather was marginal but acceptable. At 0938, the first heavy bombers appeared over the target area. The bombardment destroyed the Panzer Division as a fighting force. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, the division commander, was in his command post when the bombing started. He later described the experience in testimony to American interrogators. The first bombs fell at 0938. Within minutes, the entire forward area was covered in smoke and dust. The ground shook continuously. Communications went dead. Bayerlein tried to move forward to assess the situation but couldn't get through the cratered landscape. Trees were uprooted, buildings were obliterated, vehicles were flipped over or buried. Soldiers who survived the initial explosions were killed by follow-on waves or went insane from the concussive shock. By noon, when the bombing finally stopped, Bayerlein estimated that 70% of his forward troops were casualties, dead, wounded, missing, or too traumatized to function. The defensive positions that had held American attacks for weeks were gone. Craters filled with debris, smoke obscuring everything, survivors staggering through the wreckage, unable to organize any coherent defense. American ground forces attacked at 1100 hours, just after the last bombs fell. The 9th, 4th, and 30th Infantry Divisions advanced with armor support, expecting heavy resistance. Instead, they found minimal opposition. German survivors couldn't fight effectively. Most were still in shock. Equipment was destroyed or buried. Communication between units was impossible. The American infantry advanced 3 kilometers the first day, deeper than any previous attack had penetrated. The second day, they advanced 5 more kilometers. The German line was broken. The 2nd Armored Division under Major General Edward Brooks advanced 25 kilometers on July 28th. The 3rd Armored Division under Major General Leroy Watson advanced 30 kilometers. German forces retreated south, trying to maintain some kind of coherent line, but the retreat was becoming a rout. Unit cohesion was breaking down. Entire battalions were simply disappearing, either destroyed or scattered across the countryside. German commanders were losing control of their forces. Field Marshal von Kluge, now commanding Army Group B after Rommel's injury, tried to organize counterattacks to close the gap. He ordered the 2nd SS Panzer Division and elements of other armored units to attack the American penetration from the flanks. The attacks failed. American air superiority made daylight movement suicidal for German armor. German tanks trying to reach attack positions were bombed and strafed before they could engage American ground forces. The counterattacks dissolved before they started. On July 30th, 1944, American forces captured Avranches, a town at the base of the Cotentin Peninsula, where the Norman coast turns south toward Brittany. Avranches controlled the road network connecting Normandy to western France. With Avranches in American hands, the entire German position in Normandy was outflanked. German forces north and west of Avranches were cut off from supply and reinforcement. The choice was retreat or destruction. The German 7th Army commander, Generaloberst Paul Hausser, requested permission to withdraw. Von Kluge requested permission from Hitler to authorize the withdrawal. Hitler refused. German forces would hold in place and counterattack to restore the front line. No withdrawal. No retreat. The order was militarily insane, but politically absolute. While Hitler and his staff in East Prussia argued about whether to permit German forces to retreat, events in Normandy made the argument irrelevant. On August 1, 1944, Lieutenant General George Patton's 3rd United States Army officially became operational. Patton had been in France since July 6th, observing, planning, positioned to take command once the breakout succeeded. Now the breakout had succeeded, and Patton was unleashed. 3rd Army's initial composition included the 8th Corps under Major General Troy Middleton, XIV Corps under Major General Gilbert Cook, XV Corps under Major General Wade Hyslop, and XX Corps under Major General Walton Walker. Approximately 12 divisions, over 200,000 men, 1,500 tanks, organized into the most mobile striking force the American military had fielded in Europe. Patton's orders from Bradley were relatively simple. Exploit the breakthrough at Avranches, clear Brittany to capture ports for Allied logistics, drive south and east to widen the gap in German lines. Bradley expected 3rd Army to spend at least a week clearing Brittany, then turn east cautiously, maintaining contact with 1st Army to the north. The German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army in Normandy were collapsing. Patton recognized the signs. German radio traffic was chaotic. Prisoners reported that their units had lost contact with higher headquarters. Reconnaissance units encountered German forces retreating without fighting. These were indicators that the enemy was no longer capable of organized defense, that they were vulnerable to rapid, deep penetration that would complete their destruction. These orders violated conventional American doctrine. American forces typically advanced on broad fronts, maintaining contact between units, clearing each area before moving forward. Patton's orders created narrow, deep penetrations with exposed flanks, supply lines stretched thin, and no clear fallback positions if the Germans counterattacked successfully. In military terms, it was risky. In Patton's judgment, it was exactly right for the situation. On August 1st and 2nd, Third Army units began moving through Avranches. The road network couldn't handle the volume of traffic. 8 divisions trying to pass through one town on 3 roads created massive congestion. Military police directed traffic continuously. Units marched day and night. Some tank units ran out of fuel waiting in traffic jams and had to be refueled by trucks driving down the columns. Despite the confusion, the movement continued. By August 3rd, Third Army had 6 divisions south of Avranches, spreading out across Brittany and southern Normandy. German intelligence identified the Third Army activation on August 1st and immediately understood what it meant. Patton was now in France. Patton was commanding the exploitation force. Everything Rommel had warned about was happening. The officer who analyzed the intelligence reports for Army Group B wrote in his daily summary that the appearance of Patton's Third Army indicated the Americans were shifting from attempting to break through German defenses to attempting to encircle and destroy German forces. The strategic situation had changed from dangerous to potentially catastrophic. Von Kluge requested again that Hitler authorize a general withdrawal behind the Seine River, approximately 150 kilometers east, where German forces could establish a defensible line and delay the American advance while preserving combat strength. Hitler refused again. German forces would counterattack at Mortain, cut through American positions, recapture Avranches, and restore the front. The attack would use all available armored divisions. It would go forward regardless of American air superiority. It would succeed because failure was unacceptable. The Mortain counterattack was scheduled for August 6, 1944. It would be Germany's last major offensive operation in France, and it would fail so completely that it would destroy any remaining chance of German forces escaping the Normandy pocket. And 300 kilometers away, in a hospital in Bernay, Erwin Rommel lay unconscious, unaware that the disaster he'd predicted was unfolding exactly as he'd warned, and that the officer he'd identified as the most dangerous American commander was proving him correct in ways even Rommel might not have imagined. The German 7th Army staff first realized the full scope of the disaster on August 4, 1944, when they lost radio contact with 3 divisions simultaneously: the 243rd Infantry Division near Rennes, the 77th Infantry Division at Saint-Malo, the 265th Infantry Division south of Avranches. All 3 divisions had been reporting normally on August 3rd. By midday, August 4th, nothing. No radio traffic, no courier contact, no reports. Generaloberst Paul Hausser, commanding 7th Army, ordered reconnaissance aircraft to locate the missing divisions. The reconnaissance flights reported American armored columns operating 50 to 70 kilometers behind where German intelligence thought the front line was. The missing divisions hadn't been destroyed. They'd been bypassed so quickly they hadn't realized they were surrounded until American forces were in their rear areas cutting their supply lines. The 243rd Infantry, Division Commander Generalleutnant Heinz Bernhard Ramke, eventually established radio contact on August 5th from an improvised position near the Brittany coast. He reported that American armored forces had driven past his positions so fast his division never engaged them. By the time Ramke realized Americans were in his rear, they'd advanced another 30 kilometers. His division was isolated, surrounded by rapidly advancing American forces that weren't stopping to reduce the pocket. They were simply continuing east, leaving the German division stranded. By August 6th, Third Army had advanced over 100 kilometers from Avranches in 5 days. The 8th Corps had reached the Brittany ports. The XV Corps was approaching Le Mans, a major road and rail junction 130 kilometers southeast of the Normandy beaches. The 12th Corps was spread across the countryside between, pushing reconnaissance elements even further south and east. German forces were scattered across western France, some units still fighting, some retreating, some simply waiting to be captured because they had no idea where American forces were or how to escape. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. On August 7, 1944, the German counterattack at Mortain began. 4 panzer divisions, 2nd Panzer, 1st SS Panzer, 2nd SS Panzer, and 116th Panzer, approximately 200 tanks and 70,000 men, attacked west from positions near Mortain toward Avranches, attempting to cut Patton's supply lines and isolate Third Army south of the penetration. The attack began at 0200 hours under cover of darkness. Initial German progress was good. They penetrated several kilometers, overran some American positions, threatened to reach Avranches. Then dawn came. And with dawn came American fighter bombers. The weather on August 7th was clear, perfect for air operations. Hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force attacked the German armor in waves. The panzers, concentrated on narrow roads trying to advance quickly, made perfect targets, because while the Germans were attacking west at Mortain, Patton was driving east and north. The XV Corps captured Le Mans on August 8th after light resistance. The German garrison, approximately 5,000 troops with minimal heavy equipment, retreated north before being surrounded. Le Mans gave Patton control of the main highway and rail network in western France. Every road heading east toward Paris ran through Le Mans. Every rail line connecting Brittany to central France passed through the city. From Le Mans, Patton could see the strategic opportunity that would define the campaign. The German 5th Panzer Army and 7th Army were concentrated in Normandy, focused on containing the Allied beachhead. American 1st Army under Bradley was pushing, south and east from the north. British and Canadian forces under Montgomery were pushing south from Caen. Patton's 3rd Army was now east of the main German force at Le Mans. If 3rd Army turned north from Le Mans toward Argentan, while 1st Army and the British pushed south, the entire German force in Normandy would be encircled in a pocket with no escape route. Patton immediately ordered XV Corps under Major General Wade Hyslop to drive north from Le Mans toward Argentan, approximately 50 kilometers north. If XV Corps reached Argentan and linked with Canadian forces pushing south from Caen toward Falaise, the encirclement would be complete. Approximately 20 German divisions, perhaps 250,000 men, would be trapped. The French 2nd Armoured Division advanced 40 kilometers on August 10th, reaching the outskirts of Alençon by evening. The town was defended by elements of the 116th Panzer Division, pulled back from the failed Mortain attack. The fighting for Alençon lasted through August 11th. The Germans were experienced, well-equipped, and understood that losing Alençon meant the encirclement of German forces to the west. They fought building to building, used their tanks effectively in the urban terrain, made the French division pay for every block, but numbers and firepower prevailed. American artillery supported the French attack. American fighter bombers hit German positions continuously. By late afternoon, August 11th, German resistance in Alençon collapsed. The survivors retreated north toward Argentan. The French 2nd Armoured Division pursued immediately, not pausing to consolidate, driving north through the night of August 11th and 12th. On August 12th, lead elements of the French 2nd Armoured Division reached positions south of Argentan. They were now less than 20 kilometers from Canadian forces attacking south from Falaise. The gap was closing. The German forces in the Normandy pocket were within hours of being completely surrounded. Then Patton received orders to halt at Argentan and not advance further north. The order came from Bradley, coordinated with Montgomery, based on concerns about Allied forces colliding in the confusion of combat if both American and Canadian forces were advancing on the same objective from opposite directions. The boundary between 21st Army Group under Montgomery and 12th Army Group under Bradley ran through Argentan. American forces were not to cross north of that boundary. Patton was furious. His forces had momentum. German resistance south of Argentan was minimal. The gap between American and Canadian forces was only 15 kilometers. His lead units could close it in 3 hours, but the order was explicit. Halt at Argentan. Do not advance into the Canadian sector. Patton argued by radio with Bradley. Bradley confirmed the order. Hold at Argentan. Regardless, on August 12th, 3rd Army held at Argentan while Canadian forces continued pushing south from Falaise. The gap remained open for 4 more days, and through that gap, German forces attempted to escape east. The escape attempt was a nightmare of military chaos. German units retreating from western Normandy converged on the narrow corridor between Falaise and Argentan. Infantry divisions that had been fighting for 2 months, reduced to fragments of their original strength, mixed with panzer divisions that had lost most of their tanks, rear area units, supply columns, artillery batteries, all trying to force their way through a corridor perhaps 10 kilometers wide under constant Allied air attack and artillery fire from both flanks. The roads became impassable, vehicles abandoned because there was no fuel, horses killed by artillery, men walking because their units no longer existed as organized formations. Allied fighter bombers flew continuous missions, attacking anything that moved. Artillery from American units, south of the pocket, and Canadian units north fired into the corridor, turning the narrow roads into killing zones. Generaloberst Hausser of 7th Army tried to maintain some kind of order, establishing traffic control points, organizing covering forces to hold the shoulders of the gap while the main force retreated. It was largely futile. The retreat became a rout. Unit cohesion broke down completely. Officers lost contact with their men. Soldiers fled individually or in small groups. Inside the pocket, German forces attempted one final breakout on the night of August 19th and 20th. Elements of the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer Divisions, the 12th SS Panzer Division, and various infantry units attacked Polish positions near Chambois, trying to force open an escape route. The fighting was brutal, close range, often hand-to-hand. Some German units broke through, most did not. By dawn, August 20th, organized German resistance inside the pocket had ended. Surviving German soldiers surrendered in groups of dozens, hundreds, thousands. The physical destruction inside the Falaise pocket shocked even experienced soldiers. Captain Belton Cooper of the 3rd Armoured Division, who entered the pocket on August 21st as part of the recovery operations, later wrote that the smell was unbearable. Thousands of dead German soldiers, thousands of dead horses, hundreds of destroyed vehicles, all decomposing in August heat. The roads were blocked by wreckage. Craters from artillery and bombs made movement difficult. Bodies were everywhere, sprawled across fields, piled in ditches, hanging from destroyed vehicles. American graves registration units counted approximately 10,000 German dead inside the pocket. Canadian forces reported similar numbers in their sector. The total German casualties from the Normandy campaign, including the Falaise pocket, were approximately 240,000 killed, wounded, or captured. The Germans lost over 1,500 tanks and assault guns, 3,000 artillery pieces, 20,000 vehicles. The 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were destroyed as effective fighting forces, but while Allied forces were closing the Falaise pocket in mid-August, Patton's 3rd Army was already racing east. On August 13th, while XV Corps held at Argentan, Patton ordered XIC Corps and XX Corps to advance toward the Seine River, approximately 150 kilometers east of the Falaise pocket. He wasn't waiting for the pocket to be reduced. He was already thinking about the next phase, the pursuit to the German border. The 12th Corps, under Major General Manton Eddy, advanced from Le Mans toward Orléans on the Loire River. The advance covered 80 kilometers in 2 days against minimal resistance. German forces in the area were scattered remnants trying to retreat before being surrounded. Most surrendered when approached by American armor. The 35th Infantry Division captured Orléans on August 16th after light fighting. The city's bridges over the Loire were intact, captured before German engineers could destroy them. The XX Corps, under Major General Walton Walker, advanced from Le Mans directly toward Paris, following the main highway northeast. The 7th Armoured Division and 5th Infantry Division made 40 to 50 kilometers per day against scattered resistance. German units attempted to establish blocking positions at river crossings and towns, but American forces either overran the positions with direct attacks or bypassed them and continued advancing. By August 20th, elements of Third Army were crossing the Seine River at multiple points south and east of Paris. The river, which German planners had expected to defend for weeks, was breached in days. Some bridges were captured intact, others were destroyed by German engineers, but American engineers built temporary bridges or established ferry operations within hours. The advance barely slowed. Paris itself was a political question, not a military one. Allied High Command had planned to bypass Paris, avoid the logistical burden of feeding and administering a city of 2 million people, but on August 19th, resistance forces inside Paris rose against the German garrison. General Dietrich von Choltitz, commanding German forces in Paris, had orders from Hitler to destroy the city rather than let it fall intact. Von Choltitz considered the order insane and ignored it, but fighting between resistance forces and German troops was intensifying. While Paris celebrated, Third Army continued east. By August 26th, American forces were 200 kilometers east of Paris, approaching the pre-war French border with Germany. The advance from Avranches to the German border, over 600 kilometers, had taken 26 days. Third Army had destroyed or scattered 15 German divisions, captured over 75,000 prisoners, liberated most of France, west, south of Paris, and demonstrated a level of operational mobility that stunned Allied and German commanders equally. The speed of the advance created massive logistical problems. Third Army's supply lines stretched back over 600 kilometers to the Normandy beaches. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every ration had to be trucked forward over roads that were often damaged or congested. The Red Ball Express, a dedicated truck convoy system using over 6,000 vehicles, ran continuously, delivering supplies from Normandy to the advancing armies. Even so, supplies couldn't keep pace with consumption. By early September, Third Army was running critically low on fuel. Tank units were advancing until they ran out of fuel, then waiting days for resupply before continuing. The advance slowed not because of German resistance but because American logistics couldn't sustain the operational tempo. Patton argued vociferously with Eisenhower and Bradley that if Third Army received priority for fuel allocation, they could reach the Rhine River before German forces reorganized. He estimated he needed 3 more days of fuel allocation to reach the German border at full strength. The German perspective on Third Army's advance reveals how completely Patton's operational method disrupted German defensive planning. German commanders expected American forces to advance methodically, clearing territory systematically, maintaining secure supply lines and unit boundaries. Instead, Third Army advanced in narrow, fast-moving columns that ignored their flanks, bypassed German strongpoints, and moved so quickly that German intelligence couldn't track their positions accurately. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, commanding 5th Panzer Army after the Battle of Normandy, was captured by British forces on August 31st near Amiens. In subsequent interrogations, he described the German command's complete inability to counter Third Army's advance. German forces couldn't establish defensive lines because before positions could be prepared, American armor had already bypassed them. German counterattacks couldn't be organized because American mobility meant the situation changed faster than German staffs could plan responses. German supply lines were constantly threatened because American reconnaissance forces operated 50 to 100 kilometers ahead of the main force, identifying targets for airstrikes and artillery. Generaloberst Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding Army Group G in southern France, faced Third Army's advance from a different direction. After the Allied landings in southern France on August 15th, Operation Dragoon, Blaskowitz was forced to retreat north up the Rhône Valley while simultaneously trying to prevent American forces advancing from Normandy from cutting off his withdrawal route. Third Army's rapid advance meant Blaskowitz's forces were constantly in danger of being trapped between American armies, advancing from 2 directions. On August 28th, elements of Third Army's 12th Corps met elements of 7th Army, advancing north from the Mediterranean coast, near Montélimar. The junction meant German forces in southern France were cut off from Germany. Blaskowitz's Army Group G, approximately 150,000 men, was forced to abandon most of its heavy equipment and retreat northeast through the Vosges Mountains, reaching German territory in mid-September, with perhaps half its original strength, exhausted and no longer combat effective. The German losses in France during August 1944 were catastrophic. The 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were destroyed in Normandy and at Falaise. Army Group G was scattered in southern France. 1st Army, defending the Atlantic ports, was isolated and eventually surrendered in isolated pockets over the following months. Total German casualties for August 1944 in France exceeded 400,000, killed, wounded, and captured. Over 2,000 tanks and assault guns were lost. 5,000 artillery pieces were destroyed or abandoned. The German army in the West ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Instead, Patton's aggressive pursuit gave German forces no time to reorganize. The rapid advance created psychological shock among German commanders who couldn't believe American forces were capable of such operational tempo. The deep penetrations forced German units to retreat before they were ready, abandoning equipment, losing unit cohesion, arriving at rear areas as disorganized fragments rather than effective formations. General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, who served as Chief of Staff for 5th Panzer Army and later wrote extensively about German operations in World War II, devoted an entire chapter of his memoirs to Patton's operations in August 1944. Von Mellenthin wrote that Patton demonstrated qualities German commanders traditionally associated only with German armoured leaders: speed, aggression, operational intuition, and willingness to accept risk. Von Mellenthin specifically compared Patton to Erwin Rommel, noting that both commanders understood that speed was a weapon, that maintaining momentum could substitute for numerical superiority, and that the psychological impact of rapid advances often achieved more than the physical destruction of enemy forces. The comparison between Patton and Rommel became common among German officers after the war. Both were aggressive armour commanders. Both preferred rapid advances to methodical consolidation. Both were willing to operate with extended supply lines and exposed flanks if it meant maintaining momentum. Both understood that exploiting success was more important than consolidating gains. The key difference, von Mellenthin noted, was that Patton commanded forces with far greater logistical support, air superiority, and material resources than Rommel ever possessed. Patton could sustain operations that would have been impossible for German forces. Rommel never saw the vindication of his warnings. He remained hospitalized from his injuries throughout August 1944. By September, he was recovering at his home in Herrlingen, Germany, but under suspicion due to his tangential connections to the July 20th plot against Hitler. On October 14, 1944, two generals arrived at his home with a message from Hitler. Rommel was implicated in the conspiracy. He could face trial, with certain conviction and execution, and his family would be arrested and persecuted. Or he could commit suicide, receive a state funeral with full honours, and his family would be protected. Rommel chose suicide. He took poison in a car driven by the generals, died within minutes, and was given a state funeral on October 18th, with Hitler sending a wreath and representatives. The official story was that Rommel had died from his injuries, sustained in July. The truth emerged only after the war. Rommel never knew that Third Army's advance validated every warning he'd given about American capabilities under aggressive command. He never knew that the breakout at Avranches led to exactly the kind of rapid, deep exploitation he'd predicted would destroy German forces in France. He never knew that Patton, the American general he'd identified as most dangerous, had proven him absolutely correct. George Patton commanded Third Army through the rest of the war in Europe. After the fuel shortage in September forced a halt, Third Army resumed operations in November, fighting through the fortified positions around Metz, crossing the Loire River, and participating in the Battle of the Bulge in December when Patton's forces wheeled north to relieve Bastogne. In March 1945, Third Army crossed the Rhine River and drove deep into Germany. By the end of the war in May 1945, Third Army had advanced further, faster than any other Allied army, had captured over 1 million German prisoners, and had suffered approximately 136,000 casualties, a remarkably low figure given the scale of operations. Patton's methods remained controversial throughout the war and afterward. His aggressive style, his willingness to accept risk, his focus on speed over security, all generated criticism from more cautious officers. Bradley and Montgomery both wrote after the war that Patton's operations sometimes created unnecessary difficulties for adjacent units, forced to protect his exposed flanks. Eisenhower acknowledged Patton's brilliance as an operational commander, but noted that his aggressive approach required careful management and couldn't be universally applied. But the results spoke clearly. In 26 days during August 1944, Third Army advanced over 600 kilometers, destroyed 15 German divisions, captured over 75,000 prisoners, and liberated most of France west of Paris. No other army in World War II, Allied or German, achieved comparable results in a similar timeframe. The advance demonstrated that American forces, when properly commanded and given operational freedom, could move faster and hit harder than any military in the world. The German perception of American military capability never fully adjusted even after Third Army's advance. German commanders continued to regard German forces as qualitatively superior, continued to believe that German tactical skill could overcome American material advantages. But privately, in conversations after the war, German officers acknowledged that Patton had shattered their assumptions about American operational capability. They'd expected Americans to be cautious, predictable, dependent on firepower because they lacked tactical skill. Patton proved Americans could be bold, unpredictable, and operationally brilliant when led by commanders who understood mechanized warfare. The fear that Rommel felt about Patton wasn't personal. It was professional. Rommel recognized in Patton a commander who operated according to the same principles that had made German armor so successful in Poland, France, and Russia: speed, aggression, exploitation of success, willingness to accept risk, psychological impact. These were the hallmarks of German blitzkrieg doctrine, and Patton applied them as effectively as any German commander. The difference was that Patton commanded forces with resources Germany could only dream about: unlimited fuel, air superiority, artillery support that could respond in minutes, logistics that could sustain operations over hundreds of kilometers. When Rommel warned that Americans under Patton would break through and couldn't be stopped once mobile, he was warning that Germany would face an opponent who combined German operational doctrine with American industrial capacity. That combination was unbeatable. The August 1944 advance proved it. Third Army demonstrated that American forces didn't need to fight cautiously, didn't need to advance methodically, didn't need to consolidate after every success. Under the right command, American armor could match or exceed anything German forces had achieved at their peak. The soldiers of Third Army understood they were part of something extraordinary. Private First Class Robert Ellis of the 4th Armored Division wrote in letters home about advancing so fast that they drove through towns where German soldiers were still eating breakfast in cafes, captured so surprised they surrendered without fighting. Sergeant Paul Morrison of the 90th Infantry Division described crossing France in 3 weeks, covering distances that had taken months of fighting in previous campaigns. Lieutenant James Crawford of the 2nd Cavalry Group wrote about reconnaissance missions, where his unit operated over 100 kilometers ahead of friendly forces, behind German lines, calling in airstrikes on retreating German columns. The German soldiers facing Third Army's advance had a different perspective. Unteroffizier Heinrich Weber of the 11th Panzer Division, captured near Argentan in mid-August, told interrogators that his unit had been ordered to establish a blocking position to delay American armor. Before they could dig in, American tanks appeared. Weber's company commander ordered them to retreat immediately because fighting was pointless. They retreated 20 kilometers, were ordered to establish another position, and again American tanks appeared before they were ready. Weber was captured when his unit disintegrated during the third attempted retreat. He said that for 3 days his unit had retreated continuously without ever fighting because they could never get established before Americans appeared. Lieutenant Carl Schmidt of the 116th Panzer Division fought at Alençon in mid-August. He later described the experience to American interrogators as hopeless. German forces were outnumbered. American artillery was overwhelming, American aircraft attacked continuously. When German forces tried to counterattack, American tanks appeared from unexpected directions, suggesting American reconnaissance was tracking German movements in real time. Schmidt said his battalion lost 70% of its strength in 2 days at Alençon, not through any single catastrophic defeat, but through continuous attrition against an enemy that seemed to have unlimited resources and complete tactical awareness. The psychological impact of Third Army's advance extended beyond the immediate battlefield. German forces throughout France realized that the Americans advancing from Normandy weren't stopping, weren't consolidating, weren't giving German forces time to organize defenses. The expectation that Americans would advance slowly, that German forces would have time to withdraw behind successive defensive lines, that the ex-post campaign would last months, all those expectations were proven false in weeks. The psychological shock contributed to the collapse of German resistance. By September 1944, when Third Army's advance finally halted due to fuel shortages, the strategic situation in Western Europe had transformed completely. In June, German forces controlled all of France, the Low Countries, and Western Germany. The Allies held a narrow beachhead in Normandy. By September, German forces had been driven back to the pre-war German border. France, Belgium, and Luxembourg were liberated. The German military in the West had been destroyed as an effective fighting force, and the transformation had occurred in 3 months, far faster than Allied planners had projected. Third Army's advance in August was the critical phase of that transformation. Operation Cobra broke through German defences, but Patton's exploitation turned a breakthrough into a rout, gave German forces no time to recover, and completed the destruction of German combat power in France. Without Third Army's aggressive pursuit, German forces could have withdrawn behind the Seine, the Somme, the Belgian border, establishing defensive lines at each river and prolonging the campaign into winter. Instead, the pursuit gave them no opportunity to establish anything, forced them to retreat continuously, and destroyed unit cohesion to the point where organized defense became impossible. The ultimate vindication of Rommel's warnings came in the contrast between Allied expectations and actual results. Allied planners in early 1944 projected that reaching the German border would take until spring 1945. They planned supply operations around that timeline. They scheduled divisions for deployment based on the assumption that the campaign in France would last 9 to 12 months. Instead, Allied forces reached the German border in 3 months. The difference between projection and reality was primarily Third Army's operational tempo during the exploitation phase. Rommel understood in spring 1944 what Allied planners didn't fully grasp until after the fact. American forces under aggressive command weren't limited by doctrine or caution, they were limited only by logistics. And American logistics, while sometimes strained, were adequate to sustain operations at a tempo far exceeding what anyone expected. Patton understood this. He pushed his forces to the absolute limit of what logistics could support. When fuel ran low, he continued advancing until tanks literally ran out of fuel, maximizing every gallon. When ammunition ran low, he prioritized artillery support for advance units, accepting risk in rear areas. When casualties mounted, he pushed forward anyway, understanding that speed reduced casualties by preventing the enemy from organizing effective resistance. This operational philosophy, aggressive exploitation regardless of risk, was exactly what Rommel had feared. Because once American forces were mobile, once they broke through German defenses and began the pursuit, German forces had no answer. They couldn't retreat fast enough. They couldn't establish defensive positions quickly enough. They couldn't concentrate forces effectively enough. American air superiority prevented daylight movement. American armor advanced too quickly for night withdrawals. American artillery and fighter bombers destroyed German forces attempting to establish blocking positions. The result was the collapse of German military power in France in August 1944. 15 divisions destroyed, 400,000 casualties. The entire German defensive position in Western Europe shattered, and the officer who predicted it, who warned it would happen, who understood better than anyone in the German military why American forces under Patton were uniquely dangerous, never saw the vindication of his analysis. Rommel was injured before the breakout, was forced to commit suicide before the campaign ended, and was given a state funeral with honours, while German forces in France were being destroyed exactly as he'd warned. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.